Reign in majesty, reign. King of kings, Lord of lords is your name. To the ends of the earth we proclaim. Reign in majesty, reign. Heaven opens, he comes into.
You're listening to Reign in Majesty by Dr. Monty Harris, praise and worship leader for B'nai Shalom Messianic Congregation in Norman, Oklahoma.
This is Monty Harris for Messianic Lifestyles, Living Life Torah Style, and I'm here to get a perspective that maybe many of you have not heard before. I'm visiting with Rabbi Avraham Greenbaum. Rabbi Avraham was born in London in 1949. He had a distinguished academic career in Latin and Greek, classics, and social sciences at King's College, Cambridge, followed by a postgraduate research as a Harkness Fellow at Harvard and Columbia. He served as a BBC World Service radio producer and commentator and went on to produce primetime BBC radio feature programs on the Lubavitch Movement and Rabbi Nachman. He then decided to devote his skills in communication to providing the English-speaking world with access to the authentic sources of Torah spirituality. After 2 years of Torah study in yeshiva in Britain, in 1980, Rabbi Greenbaum settled with his family in Jerusalem, Israel, where he established a state-of-the-art audio studio, producing Torah educational programs for adults and children. In the same period, he embarked on his series of translations, commentaries, and popular print publications on Torah thought and belief, while also continuing his studies towards rabbinic ordination, which he received from Rabbi Meir Brandsdorfer of Jerusalem's Erach Haredis in 1988. Rabbi Greenbaum founded the Azamra Institute in 1986 with the mission of disseminating Torah teachings using the languages and media of our times. Azamra established one of the first Torah websites on the internet, and that was in 1994, www.azamra.org. This continues to be a cutting-edge site using the latest internet broadcast and instant messaging technologies to communicate with thousands of regular users all over the world. Azamra publishes and distributes a variety of quality printed educational and inspirational works in English and Hebrew. Rabbi Greenbaum teaches at the Azamra Institute's Tiferet Study Center in Jerusalem's Gula district, and you feel free to correct any of my pronunciations here, Rabbi.
Monty, it's just great. It's really great. Thank you for this introduction.
He also teaches regularly on tour in locations all over Israel, Britain, USA, and Canada, entrancing audiences with clear, comprehensible explanations of the deepest Torah concepts, together with accomplished vocal performance of Hasidic melodies with his own guitar and piano accompaniment. And in fact, you're in the United States as we speak on what we would call a tour, a teaching tour. And so tell me where you're at in that progress. Are we towards the beginning, towards the end?
I'm about just over halfway through. I came into New York on Tuesday morning of last week, and after a couple of days in the New York area, I went on to Nashville, Tennessee, where I was present at the National Christian Broadcasters Convention and was attending a breakfast solidarity with Israel, and also a screening of a film by Laurie Cordoza-Moore on rising up to the new anti-Semitism in our age, which was attended by many Christian broadcasters, pastors, and other leaders, and also by Rabbi Gerald Meister and by Mr. James Woolsey, former director of CIA. And so that was a very amazing and inspiring weekend for me, also being present at a Shabbat which I held, which was attended by people from many different backgrounds and beliefs, and we experienced together the Shabbat as we have received it from our fathers and our sages. And then on Tuesday I flew into Los Angeles, where I have quite a busy program of lectures, teachings. We have a Shabbat this coming weekend and a Shabbat the following weekend, with many people joined together to sing and rejoice. In fact, this coming Shabbaton is at a very wonderful prayer group here in Los Angeles, who have the name of a minyan, which is, of course, the quorum of 10 Jewish males for prayer, but they are called the Happy Minyan. And it's been going now for 15 years under the inspiration of the late Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And the Shabbatot, which are held at the Happy Minyan, are truly, truly entrancing, with many hours of singing and warmth and joy together, one of the true signs of redemption in our times. So that's what I'm doing here in America, Monty.
That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. We're glad to have you, and welcome to our program.
Well, thank you so much, Monty. It's a real privilege to take part in this.
The privilege is all mine, I assure you. Now tell me, the name of your organization is Zamra. Can you explain what that means and why you chose that name for your institute?
Well, we find in Psalms 146, David says, Azamra lelokai ba'odi, I shall sing to my God with my strength. And that verse was taken by Rabbi Nathan of Breslov, who is really my personal guide and mentor since I first encountered his teachings in 1977. Rabbi Nathan takes that verse as really, I would say, the foundation of all of his teachings, that a person can sing out to God when they are joyous from all of the good that they see and perceive around them. And of course, we have so much negativity within and outside, and we have to learn how to change our perceptions until we can find the goodness and come to joy. And it seemed to me, when I was looking for a name for the institute that I was trying to found in the 1980s, that Rabbi Nathan's teaching on this searching for the good points and putting point to point together, gathering bundles of points and making this into melodies and songs, I felt this would be a wonderful keynote for teaching Rabbi Nachman's teachings in our time and seeking to communicate with people who may not understand my language or the Hebrew language, but will hopefully resonate also to the musical melodies. So that's really the theme of the Institute, letting these melodies of Torah ripple out and spread out to the world and attain the sweetening that we're all longing and yearning for in the world.
That's great. On your biography on azamra.org says that you followed a spiritual path that brought you back to Torah. And I think many of our listeners can relate to that experience because many of us came out of the Christian church to follow Torah. What was your spiritual upbringing and what caused you to know you were to study and teach Torah?
Well, I was brought up in London in the middle class, so-called middle of the road Jewish community, which had a hodgepodge of aspects of Torah observance and remembrance, but combined also with other things that were simply contrary to this. The lifestyle of Friday night candles and kiddush, followed by the turning on the television, or Saturday morning synagogue, followed by football and so on, and going to the football matches or shopping or to the movies. And I just left the whole thing in disgust in my late teens. I was thinking it was all so hypocritical. And it was one thing that my mother always said to me that really held me. And she said, don't look at the people, go back to the sources, go back to the original scriptures. And that was what I did at the age of 25, when I was searching for tranquility, searching for a lifestyle that would be appropriate to the world we live in, for a way to direct my energies. And I really started turning to the Bible, and then I realized that the ancient rabbinical texts had the keys to the interpretation and the understanding of the Bible. And I got a problem when I wanted to tie the fringes on my garments, the tzitzit, and with even an instruction book, I couldn't figure out how to do it. I discovered that you've got to go to people who have learned it from somebody who taught them hands-on. So I went to the Lubavitch Center in London, Chabad Center, that was in the 1970s, and asked if somebody could help me to tie the tzitzit, and he said, yes, sure, and why don't you come for Shabbat also? And that was my first experience of the Orthodox Shabbat, where observance of the halachot of Shabbat was part of the order of the day. And things went, from step to step after that. I think the most important moment for me really was preceded by a dream I had that I was in the Chabad house, but there was a raging, blazing fire outside, and I was so longing to get out to experience this raging fire that was burning, this bonfire. And a couple of days later, I first heard about Rabbi Nathan of Breslov, who so many people now know as one of the latter-day sources of inspiration, of guidance, of happiness and joy. And that I discovered in 1977, a few years after making my first inroads into Torah study. And that was the spirituality that entranced me. Particularly, I would say, Rabbi Nathan's telling us quite plain and simple, get out of the city, go to the woods, go to the fields, and there commune with God alone in seclusion. He said this is the new pathway that our fathers trod, and he said, I'll show you a new path, and it's really a very old path, the path of simple communion with God through the simplest prayers coming up from the heart, through the lips, straight into the ear of heaven. So that has been the source of my inspiration in the years that have followed, which has been filled with studying many of the classic texts of the Torah, Maimonides' Code of Law, and the Shulchan Aruch, and of course daily study of Bible. And these are the things that nourish one in these times of confusion and darkness and threat, suspicion and so much terrible violence and cruelty.
I remember when I first attended a Erev Shabbat service, and just seeing something as simple as blessing our wives and our children resonated with me, and that's something I had never experienced before. And I can relate to seeing those things that resonate in your soul and knowing that that's where you're supposed to be going. That's great.
Well, I do indeed resonate with that, Monty, yes.
Now, your website, azar.org, is filled with information and resources. You're an internationally known teacher of Torah spirituality, Hasidut, Kabbalah, preventive healthcare, healing, and environmental responsibility, and the author of over 25 books. I'm going to read off some of your titles here. The Essential Rabbi Nachman, and then a couple of translations, 138 Openings of Wisdom by Rabbi Luzzatto, The Secrets of the Future Temple by Rabbi Luzzatto, and then your titles Under the Table and How to Get Up, Jewish Pathways of Spiritual Growth, and then on the subject of healing, The Wings of the Sun, The Jewish Healing Tradition in Theory and Practice, A Call to Live, Jewish Guidance on Healing, and A Joyous Heart, Torah Healing Wisdom. Now, there are certain Western philosophies that teach that we are primarily material beings and that the metaphysical is simply a side effect of how matter interacts. Now, in this Western culture, we're challenged to see ourselves as primarily spiritual beings in every aspect of our life, and we tend to separate our lives into compartments. We have our daily lives in one box and our spiritual lives in another, and our health tends to be in the daily life box, and we tend to only add it to the spiritual life box when there's a crisis. We pray for divine healing. So when I began to read about Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, I was struck by how different his view of life and health is than the average American today. Would you give us more of an introduction to Rabbi Nachman and his teachings, especially on health?
This year, the year 2010 to 11, which is the Torah year 5771, is actually the bicentennial of Rabbi Nachman's passing in October 1810 on the fourth day of the festival of Sukkot. So he was born in 1772. He lived for 38 years, which would have taken other people's lifetimes to accomplish what he accomplished in his purity, his spirituality, his Torah, comprehensive Torah knowledge. And he was living at a very critical time. He was born just 4 years before the American Declaration of Independence. He lived through the period of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, which swept up the whole of Europe and the Middle East. And in these turbulent times, I think he was a figure who really connected the innocence and the purity of the pre-industrial world that had developed over thousands of years with the new, perhaps even terrible societies that were growing up afterwards, with these vast urban complexes, this environmental destruction by industry and by man's busyness and his exploitation of the environment, the wars, mass movements of populations. So he was connecting, I know that there were not troubles before his time, but certainly the Industrial Revolution was really getting going just as he lived. And he was a man who spent his early years, his child and his youth, out in the woods and the forest in meditation and prayer, following the strictest pathways of the Kabbalistic mystics of ablutions and the mikveh, the pool of purifying waters, and the devotions of mental yichudim, the joining of letter to letter of the holy names of God. And he was obviously blessed with one of the very few exceptional neshamot of all mankind. He brought down a Torah of love and of kindness and of the transcendence of conflict, peace, inner peace leading to communal and general peace. And he left us with a phenomenal heritage of literature, including his very tersely worded and full of fireworks Torah discourses, just picking anywhere and everywhere off the table of Torah wisdom. Wherever he chose, he could pick a verse or a midrash or a section from the Talmud. He could put it all together and let us with the most surprising and novel teachings that never fail to inspire and to make us feel renewed. He also left us with his wonderful, wonderful stories. I would like to say, Monty, since you've been kind enough to mention my publications, that very many of those that you mentioned in the fields of Rabbi Nachman's teachings of healing, of Kabbalah, those books are fully available on azamra.org website for free browsing, besides the ability to purchase hard copy. But I feel that these teachings are so important to the world that they are available free for all users to come and visit us with the greatest of pleasure to benefit from these wonderful teachings. So there, I think, is Rabbi Nachman talking back to us from 200 years ago, cutting us down to size, reminding us of our mortality and our frailty and our foolish dependence upon technology and medicine and all the other crutches and all the other idols that people have, when Reb Nachman always reminds us that it all comes back to God. It always comes back to God and to our eternal purpose. Our purpose in this world as being simply in the vestibule before the great hall of the world to come. Reb Nachman's immutable wisdom expressed so intimately to us in his charming and pleasant way.
That's amazing. I know that that I want to thank you personally for making that available on your website, because that, when I was looking for resources on taking a spiritual approach to life and health, that was a great resource for me. And I wanted to thank you for making that available to us.
Well, thank you for saying that, Monty.
Now, rather than that mechanistic or materialistic approach that we take in the West, Rabbi Nachman taught that healing is primarily a spiritual matter. Is that correct?
Indeed so, yes. As you said earlier, Rabbi Nathan takes the classical view of the human B'nai Adam, the children of Adam, as being a joining of soul and body. And they follow, each of them, a different logic, and yet they have something in common. The soul is the adequate receptacle for the body is the adequate receptacle for the soul, as long as God chooses to keep the two together. But eventually they must separate, and the soul will go to one plane and the body to a different plane, and they follow a different logic.
Right.
I mean, scientists would have us believe that everything is the effect of causes that came before.
Mm-hmm.
And we do see that causality governs nature, and the trees grow because of the sunshine and the rain and the air and so on. But human beings have besides the way that our physical bodies function, obviously through physical causality, that we eat and the food is digested and filled with fuel and we breathe, etc. But the way we actually function in what is important to us in our lives is not at all bound up with cause. It's bound up with a completely different thing that is called intention. Intention. I intend soon maybe to get my lunch. I intend to go out later. I'm planning. I'm looking forward to what I have to do today, tomorrow, a week's time, a year's time, 10 years' time. We look forward, and it is from our vision of what we see in the future that we get motivated to do the things that we do today and tomorrow. You know, we're working towards that vacation or building that house or doing that degree or taking that project. And that's all in the realm of intentions. Well, what does science have to say about people's intentions? Can science measure people's intentions? Can science measure how committed people are to their goals? Can science determine which person will succeed in attaining their goal and which person might not attain their goal? Science, that doesn't deal with these things at all. I mean, if it deals with them at all, it's in the most gingerly manner with very, very limited quantitative researches. But the things that matter to us are love and fulfillment and feeling good and being with our dear ones and attaining knowledge and understanding and all the other things we want to do. Well, that's all done up with intention. Science has nothing, cannot talk about that in any way. And so it's obvious that actually the realm in which we all live our lives is if you want to call it psychological, take the first part of the word psychological from the Greek psyche, meaning a soul. The ego psychology of this world is simply the foot of the neshama, the soul that goes from level to level above this time-bound world. So we've all, through the mass media and through the education that the majority of us have been exposed to, we've been sort of from birth and childhood brainwashed into a worldview that drains out all of the holiness and the beauty of the world and of our lives. And the scientists, at the end of the day, have nothing to say to us about this. And science is at a loss. That's why we need Hasidut in order to open up for us the things that motivate the heart, love and fear. And it's a different realm. And as soon as we start thinking about it, we do see that it is our dreams and our goals and our ability to attain them, or our disappointment and grief and depression and not attaining what we want and our falling into cynicism and other things. It's all bound up with our souls. And this actually affects our bodies. I'm not saying there's a one-way effect from soul to body. It's something that is interactive. It is holistic. And the Kabbalistic wisdom has the concepts with which to understand this duality of the person, soul and body.
I love that concept of the Rebbe's teaching the key to health being joy, which is a mental, emotional, spiritual state, as opposed to what we would term a physical state. Now,
The Hebrew word that Rabbi Nachman uses is simcha.
right.
Simcha
Yes.
is it's like so many Hebrew words and biblical terms, very hard to translate into one English word because the word joy may conjure up different things to different people. You know, the one may be in a sort of happy mood or lightheaded, and that's also simcha. But the deepest simcha is one where we have a complete wholeness, because on all levels we are in harmony with God, in accordance with God's will. And that is the true deep simcha, that a person is feeling fulfilled, forging forward to their true goal as God's servant. The spiritual energy that generates is what brings healing vibrations into the physical body. The person is charged with love and desire to serve God, and that is the simcha, that's the state of simcha.
You state these things so eloquently. These are things that resonate with me, but I really love the way that you put this into terms that we can understand and relate to. There are some concepts in your book, The Wings of the Sun, the Jewish healing tradition and theory and practice, that bear striking similarities to Far Eastern philosophy, such as the elements of creation. So the underlying principle of health that I saw in that section of the book was that health is the result of balancing the elements within the body to achieve harmony. And am I oversimplifying that?
Well, you see, there are things that we see in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine and other Oriental medical systems that do obviously parallel the worldview of the Torah. And I think what they have in common is that they are pre-Enlightenment ways of looking at the world. You know, the intellectual Enlightenment flowing on from the Renaissance and growing momentum into the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries has left the world with the materialistic, sort of non-spiritual view, despite so much actual evidence to the contrary. And modern man, in our arrogance, have lost contact with the very profound metaphysical concepts on which both Torah worldview and the worldview of the Orient have. And I dare say this is true of Southern American Indian traditions and, in fact, of people from earlier eras all over the world who share in common that, you know, the sky above us and the stars and the planets and the changing seasons, these are the eternals which to the human mind are seen to be understood in terms of, you know, the element of fire, which underlies all sort of heat and energy in the world, or the element of water, which underlies all water-related things in the world, the air mediating between them, and the physical earth, which is the vessel for the other three. These are very universal ideas. I mean, when I studied Latin and Greek classics, we studied the early Greek philosophers who, interestingly enough, are said to have had some influences from the Academy of Mount Carmel, where Elijah the prophet and the students of the prophets were. So these are very universal elements. And again, I think Rabbi Nachman is pointing to modern man and saying, look, let the scales fall off your eyes to see that so many deep, deep concepts have been discussed in earlier teachings and philosophers. And his teachings about healing do stem from that worldview of the elements. And so for Rabbi Nachman, as for the Kabbalistic teachings found in the Holy Zohar and in the writings of Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the Kabbalistic giant of the 1500s, we do see these elements governing the workings of the body, just as they govern the workings of creation on all levels, from the most purely spiritual down to the most thickly material. And so these are parts of our bodies, and many people who are exposed to Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine will not find it all surprising the kinds of issues that can come up in the body as understood from the Kabbalistic point of view, that there are elements of heat and dark anger coming from the liver and the spleen, and there are pure spiritual elements coming through the lungs and from the brain. And there are all these different elements in the body, and according to our decisions and the course that our life takes us, we may be sometimes getting imbalance into one of these bodily elements. And we can clearly see, for example, the classic case of the stressed businessman who's spending the day racing and sweating after mammon, and people in his category are frequent visitors to the emergency hospital services to deal with a massive heart attack. And if you analyze the person's life, you analyze their diet, you'll see that there are very strong sort of liver and stomach elements, and much fewer of the pure cerebral spiritual energies in such people. So we can actually see how if we learn how to look at people, we can see how these different elements are gathering strength in one person in one way, another person in a different way. And the Kabbalistic healing pathway, which Rabbi Nathan, I think, alone among the all of the masters really brought down in full. I mean, it's contained and visible in the Zohar writings, particularly the Tikkun Zohar. It's also contained in the Lurianic system, but not really specified out. It's Rabbi Nachman who really, gives us brief glimpses of this entire system, and he gives us enough to go on. I think it comes down from the Torahs I brought in the Wings of the Sun, dealing with his healing pathway, to inform us how to sort of seek to get back the balance. I mean, the whole Torah is about balance. You balance the days of the week with the Shabbat. And man is balanced with woman in the home, husband and wife. And there's balance between parents and children. And there's balance between what we take from the world, what we eat, and what we leave aside because we don't need any more. All of this leads to a balanced way of life when people are clear about their goals and their purpose, and they have things worked out. And also when they're lacking something, they have a balanced way of dealing with the lack by speaking about it to God and praying about it and knowing that God will answer at the right time, striking a balance between what we have to do to pursue our goals and what we must leave in the hands of God. All of these things lead to a balanced person who is able to rejoice in life and serve God with the help that comes from all these positive vibrations through the body.
And so when you're writing on the subject of health and balance in your books, A Call to Live, Total Fitness and a Healthy Future, that is expanding on that and really bringing it into something that we can apply to our lives in a daily manner.
That's correct. Rabbi Nachman was very opposed to doctors and conventional medicine. Now, one could certainly understand that historically, because at his time the doctors were real murderers. I mean, with pre-anesthetics and pre-antibiotics and pre-everything else. And people have argued and do argue that in our age, the very extreme pathway that Rabbi Nachman laid out for healing would not really be applicable for most people. But I think the bottom line of all of his teachings is don't, God forbid, wait until something is not right, but rather lead a harmonious lifestyle from the outset and bring up your children in a harmonious lifestyle. In The Wings of the Sun, I primarily was trying to bring Rabbi Nachman's teachings on healing and his healing pathway into English with a full biblical and Talmudic background. In other literature which has come out of Wings of the Sun has a different purpose, somewhat. The book A Call to Live, which is also available free online, is directed specifically to people faced with very serious life challenges, be it in the form of life-threatening illness or other serious issues. And the purpose was to provide the very essence of Rabbi Nachman's encouragement and inspiration in an easy format. So it's really a secondary work which does not quote the original sources, but tries to bring out the essence of the actual pathway Rabbi Nachman is advocating in practice. And of course, it was very inspirational. Please do feel free to read it online, print it out, and give it to people, because the message is very, very succinct in that work. The books that we've written for children, students, and their parents and teachers, published by Azamra in Israel, which are available in English translation, are attempting to provide the main guidelines for a balanced lifestyle, particularly for people who are observing the Torah, but this is also applicable to all people who know that meditation and relaxation and prayer and optimism are a part of the good life. And I've drawn the teachings contained in those works primarily from one of my very outstanding heroes and teachers, the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides. And Maimonides begins his entire 1,000-chapter code of Jewish law. In the first section deals with faith and belief. The second section deals with the appropriate attitudes and traits to cultivate in order to serve God. And in chapter 4 of Hilchot De'ot, the laws of attitudes, Maimonides gives an entire holistic lifestyle, including healthy eating, exercise, hygiene, and other fundamental healthful functioning. And this is reflected in a very famous in Jewish Orthodox circles work known as the Capsule Shulchan Aruch, the abbreviated code of law, which came out about 150 years ago, which in chapter 32 has also the same holistic lifestyle drawn from Maimonides' teachings, and Maimonides has some other works which are referenced in Wings of the Sun. Maimonides was one of the outstanding holistic healers of all time, who said that a doctor that has unhealthy patients is no doctor, because the real task of the doctor is to educate people in healthy living, not to wait till they show up, God forbid, at the clinic. And so the guidance is very simple. It's like organic living with an emphasis on grains, fruits and vegetables, and eating meat and fish, etc., eggs, cheese, where applicable, where appropriate, without exaggerating in what we take in, leading a healthful lifestyle from the point of view of nutrition, that is, and leading a healthy lifestyle from the point of view of keeping our bodies fit and exercised through, among the simplest things, like I submitted all of our materials to qualified medical experts to check that everything that I was saying was in accordance with contemporary accepted medical wisdom for preventive health care. And I do have that approbation from doctors, which I think is also important. And one of the doctors told me that if everybody would simply make sure to do a half-hour brisk walk 4 times a week, that would very adequately take care of regular people's good health. And another wonderful, wonderful thing which is advocated by Rabbi Nachman is Hasidic dance. Hasidic dance, which is the dance of devotion to Hasidic music, which is the music of pure and righteous souls, whose intention is to bring us to true spiritual joy and attachment to the Creator through the joy generated by the dance. Well, dance, I would say, is probably, with brisk walking, the top aerobic activity, with only swimming, another practice that is also mentioned in the Talmud as something that parents should teach their children. Swimming, dancing, and walking, these are wonderful, wonderful natural health guaranteeing activities which can be done without expensive equipment and without sort of electronic readouts, and accompanied by a great deal of joy.
So science is verifying that many aspects of the Torah lifestyle, from these kinds of activities to even kosher food and appropriate sexuality, all of these things result in better health. So what do you think of the idea that Torah lifestyle is beneficial in all aspects of our life, because it's in line with spiritual laws, but also in line with the natural laws of creation?
Well, that indeed is precisely what I discovered when I was really embarking on my pathway back in the mid-1970s, and I saw that if we can unveil the true Torah from behind the crust of established distortions and caricatures of the lifestyle, if we can get back to the authentic message, I think this is a life that is completely in harmony with the universe. I mean, we measure time by the new moon, and we measure the years by the barley crop, which is produced by the sun shining at a particular time with a particular intensity. And we have the springtime festival of the harvest, and we have the autumn festival of the fruits, and the sukkah, and the prayers for rain. It's all so much bound up with the ecology and with the environment, and the living is harmonious. The Torah allows us to slaughter animals, but not for the selfish, ravenous, hungry gratification of appetite for which this wholesale slaughter is being used in the world today, with millions of animals being daily slaughtered and their brains stunned by the stun guns, and being processed to provide people with this diet in the restaurants, and so on. That's not what the Torah intended. You know how many cautions the Torah gives us before we slaughter an animal, and how the sages said that we have to understand that it's a great privilege that we are able to ingest the meat of the animal, which was made from the herbs and the grasses the animal ate. And those herbs were nurtured from the minerals of the earth. So in the animal that we're eating, we have the minerals, we have the grasses and the herbs and the vegetable, and we have the animal. And now we eat the animal, it's going to become part of us. What are we going to do with this animal? We can't just use it to feed our lusts and our coarse material nature. We need to elevate these animal energies in the thoughts that we think, the prayers that we offer, the songs that we sing, the activities with which we serve God. These are what we have to do with our food. Eating an animal is such a great thing that you might eat a piece of meat or poultry on the Shabbat as the very center of the Shabbat meal. A portion of fish on the Shabbat, but not that every meal, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, has to be a meat meal and meat for lunch and meat for dinner. I mean, that's so out of harmony with the environment. And here the Torah teaching is so in harmony with the environment. We didn't even yet get to begin talking about the future state for which we yearn, of the restoration of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, where then we shall have to have a complete revolution in human thought in order to understand what the priests will be doing in the sacrifices of the animals in the temple. We shall have to go through a complete existential and a revolution of consciousness in order to be ready to understand what the Torah has taught us in Leviticus about these sacrifices. But hopefully, if we can, in practice today, lead our Messianic lifestyles with sincerity and honesty, we will get a lot closer to that great shift of consciousness that we are awaiting.
I'm just in awe of that, of what I'm hearing. This is like a private conversation that I'm having with you, but I know that there are many other people going to be listening. So if I sound a little dumbfounded, it's because of the profound things that I'm hearing, and just trying to process these things stated in this way. And I really love this. This is great. Now,
thank you, Mark. It's a real pleasure to take part in your program.
Well, earlier, as we mentioned, you're a teacher of Kabbalah, and I know the subject of Kabbalah can make some people uncomfortable. But when I listen to your teaching, the Kabbalah of money, you make a very enlightening explanation of the different approaches to Kabbalah and what Hasidut accomplishes in regard to Kabbalistic concepts. Could you briefly share with our listeners that insight?
I think there are two aspects of classical Orthodox Judaism that have traditionally unsettled many non-Jewish people, and indeed not a few Jewish people as well, and they are Talmud and Kabbalah. And I think the time has come to cast off the veil and cast off the crust of misconceptions and distortions. The Talmud is the revealed teachings of the Torah. The Kabbalah is the mystical teachings of the Torah. The Talmud is contained in the volumes of the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud and the accompanying materials from the stages at the end of the Second Temple period and the early post-Second Temple destruction period. And these show people who were familiar with the entire biblical text in Hebrew from back to front and front to back, and familiar with the logic that is to be applied to understand the seeming contradictions in the text, which are all resolved so perfectly by this brilliant and amazing system of logic that is actually implicit in the biblical text itself, in the Hebrew. That's the Talmud. But the Kabbalah, I think the reason why the Kabbalah more than anything has always been freaking people out is because it was perceived as a sort of dangerous alchemy. It was like, mad professors doing these crazy experiments in a laboratory. They're going to blow up the entire world. I think that's the way that people can perceive the Kabbalah. In London in the end of the 1700s, there was a whole clique that brought the word Kabbal into the English language as a group of people who had their sort of secret crazy rabbis, as it were, who were dealing with this very, very high-powered stuff. I mean, imagine in a theoretical physics a professor's office some intense discussions about the implications of this equation or that equation. So for the Kabbalistic, true Kabbalistic masters, arguing about names and formulae and incantations and so on, this actually provoked a whole scandal in the British upper classes with an aristocrat in London getting involved in this. And this, I think, was one of the things that gave the Kabbalah a very bad name. There were also the German scholars of the Jewish Enlightenment who were rejecting all of the traditional received wisdom in the 1900s, the early 1900s, the critical Bible commentators who were trying to attribute these holy texts to author A and author P and author Q and author Y and all that. Well, they also really tried to knock down the Kabbalah. I mean, my parents were like many good, pious, middle-of-the-road Jewish families, had what was considered to be the standard great history of the Jews, a very well-known work back in the 1920s and 30s, considered then to be the authoritative history of the Jews and Judaism. And in his sections about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, and his sections about Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, the 16th century Tzfat Kabbalistic giant, and his writings about Rabbi Nachman and Baal Shem Tov, he creates this dark sort of picture of these demon rabbis, which has given this a very bad name. But my personal Kabbalistic teacher has always been Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, two of whose works I've translated into English, Secrets of the Future Temple and the 138 Openings of Wisdom. Well, now, Rabbi Luzzatto is an author of one of the very well-known Torah classics, The Path of the Just, in which in the 1700s he encapsulated the entire moral, ethical, spiritual pathway of ascent of the Torah, drawing on all of the classical sources. But he was a childhood prodigy living in Italy, born in 1707, and he died at the age of 40 in 1747, and he was a genius with an encyclopedic mind, and what he did with supreme lucidity and clarity was to set out the Kabbalistic wisdom, just like Maimonides set out the legal wisdom of Judaism, just like Moses Maimonides in the 1100s was writing his Mishnah Torah, which clearly, lucidly sets out all aspects and sections of the oral law and how it's rooted in the biblical law. Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in Italy in the 1700s did exactly the same for the Kabbalah. He took these highly abstruse texts of Zohar and the writings of Ari, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, volumes and volumes of Zohar, and the Etz Chaim of the Ari and the 8 gates of the Ari, and he made it all into a clear, simple system. I mean, I won't say simple, that you could just open it and Kabbalah 101, get the whole thing in a minute. But he made the whole thing accessible, and we see it not in this dark, demonized way of greats in the history of the Jews and of the German Maskilim so-called scholars, but we see it the way that it came down in purity to people like Rabbi Nachman. I'm really not into teaching the metaphysical secrets of Kabbalah and the name combinations and the ways of attaining Holy Spirit. Anybody who wants to can get those books in a bookstore. They can learn Hebrew and they can try and crack their teeth on it. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan of blessed memory made accessible Kabbalistic meditation of the prophets, the Kabbalists, in his brilliant translations and commentaries. And I think what is very helpful to people who are searching for God through the Torah, through the Bible, is to understand the Kabbalistic worldview as presented so clearly by Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. It comes through in the Secrets of the Future Temple, which could be seen as a sort of introductory work to this wisdom, besides what it has to teach about Ezekiel's vision of the future temple. But it's in the 138 openings of wisdom that he really explains the whole worldview and system that lies behind the teachings of the Zohar and lies behind the teachings of Ari, which are really one teaching. It's one Torah. And Ramchal has given us the keys to break through these bedazzling concepts of Kabbalah and understand what they're really talking about and how they relate to the world which we know and understand, which is a world where our job is to choose good and to reject evil and to bring about the conquest and vanquishment of evil by good through the grace of God. So I think that Kabbalistic study can help us to deepen our understanding and also to develop our love of God and our fear of God. I think that for anybody who cannot read the original texts, all of the literature about Yichudim and about the kavanot, the inner intentions of the prayers, some of them have been made available in English, but if people can't study the original text, then those particular secrets are not for them anyway. And it's the other, I don't study that stuff, and I don't feel it relevant to me because I think that Rabbi Nachman's Chassidut has superseded that in the sense that the essential mission of Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, Rabbi Nachman's great-grandfather, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, who lived from 1698 to 1760, and the intention of Rabbi Nachman and his outstanding student, Reb Nassan of Breslov, was to enable the simple practitioners of the path of the Torah in the simplest possible way to accomplish these very yichudim through our kiddush on Friday night, through our breaking of bread on the Shabbat, through our eating the matzahs of Pesach or sitting in the sukkah, and also through our business activities, through the integrity and honesty with which we conduct our affairs, through giving a price and that's the price, and through rectifying mistakes and so on, through all of these ways of fulfilling the commandments. Chassidus teaches us how to make those very yichudim, which are spoken about in the Kabbalistic sources, and we don't need to know about that unless we are on the level where we can study them in the original, but we can certainly apply these lessons. I would like to say a word about Rabbi Nathan, who I just mentioned, Rabbi Nachman's student. Rabbi Nathan was, like his master, a pure, loving soul who produced a literature of books of prayers, but also, I think, his undiscovered work called Likutei Halachot. Rabbi Nachman, unknown to many people, advocated daily study of the halacha as an absolutely necessary part of our lifestyle, because the halacha is the going, it's the pathway that takes us to the right track, doing good and rejecting evil. That's what the halakha is about, distinguishing and differentiating between good and evil, because that was what the serpent mixed up in the first place when the fruit of the tree looked good and looked nice, but its end was bitterness of gallstone. And so the daily study of the halakha is what Rabbi Nachman advocated, and like so much else in the Torah, it is mere bones without the breath of life in it, without chassidut, without the insights of chassidut into the apparently dry laws of Shulchan Aruch, which are the pathway of Torah observance. Inside this apparently dry code, and what it couldn't be otherwise, this is the doctor's recommendations for healthy living in all states and countries, bringing in, you hear me, Monty?
Yes.
You're with me. This is you're like a doctor's reference book, the Shulchan Aruch. But what interests us as people trying to go in the path of the Torah is how we can fulfill the daily prayers, the weekly Shabbat, the festivals, and the other commandments, the menstrual purity, family purity, and the laws of kashrut, what we don't eat, what we may eat, how we can pursue them not as empty rituals and relics, but as a living, soul-inspired body where the bones get up and have life breathed into them. And this is the achievement of Rabbi Nachman's student, Rabbi Nathan of Breslov, in his work Likutei Halachot, which follows the Shulchan Aruch law code, section by section, subject by section, with Rabbi Nathan writing in each section of laws a whole discussions through the introductions of Rabbi Nachman on the meaning of these practices. This is a most amazing work, and unfortunately only very small sections have been translated into English, but I hope that it will be possible to draw more from Rabbi Nathan's insights. I have on his Amra website a series of MP3s that deal with his Hasidic insights on the laws of our diet, on permitted and forbidden species, on forbidden fats and blood, and all of the other laws relating to salting of meat and koshering meat and so on and so forth. That series is available. You can access it through the archive of MP3 classes, which is readily visible on the site's navigation.
Thanks for mentioning that. I wanted to make sure that the listeners were aware of that also. What we usually wind up with is this question, and it's a wide open question, so feel free to answer it however you wish. But the question we ask is, what does it mean to you to live life Torah style?
Well, it is the consuming passion of my life and the life of my wife and my children to lead this lifestyle. For us, this is the Torah, and this is our life from the moment of getting up in the morning to the moment of going to sleep at night. It is going to sleep with a prayer, with Shema. It is rising in the morning very early in order to study and pray before the business day would begin, rising and immediately on getting out of the bed, washing one's hands, pouring water over each hand 3 times, and then after attending to one's needs and cleansing oneself, possibly by going for ablution, it's continued with some time of Torah study and time of prayer in the synagogue. And it is followed by what I eat for my breakfast, that the food is balanced nutritionally, and it is food that is pure, it is kosher food, and the food that we eat in our home. My wife prepares all the food that we eat during the week and on the Shabbat in the home. We avoid, in every possible way, purchasing manufactured foods that have heaven knows what additives and colorings and so on. So a part of keeping kosher, which simply means pure, is the nutritional purity of the foods, a simple, wholesome diet. And this is what fortifies us. Joining our prayer life before we eat the foods, we say the blessings before, and we say the blessings afterwards. And we then go out to our work, and the Torah must come into our work in the words that we speak to people, the way that we greet people, the way we smile at people, the things that we engage in, that we try to accomplish. We must have all of our life activities trying to bring them under the umbrella and the shade of our Torah faith, that the activities we're engaged in with strange people in the workplace are also filled with our faith in God and our knowledge that we are God's ambassadors in the world, and that our conduct must be exemplary, and that we must be radiating the love and the truth of the Torah, a smiling face, a willingness to talk. The word shalom is a very important part of the Torah vocabulary. Shalom is peace. It's an invitation to peace, an expression of peace. I think in the way that we bring up our children, the Torah lifestyle is of the greatest importance. We have, living where we do in Jerusalem, I think been able, more than many people are, to try to insulate our children from the corrupting influences of a television, which we do not have, we do not watch, and we do not allow children to watch it, corrupting influences of music stemming from a culture that has become corrupt, that gives expression to the worst human vices and appetites. We will not let into our homes corrupting influences. We do not have internet in the home if there is a need for internet for business or something else, but this is not an entertainment for children. Children are encouraged to be amused and active through constructive things. There's the bonding of parents and children at the Shabbat tables, at the meals. There's the bonding of father and son when we sit together over the Chumash, over the words of the Torah, over a Mishnah, and we sit together and we learn together. And there's other kinds of bonding when we go out for a hike and when we have to go around the city, and we turn a visit to the store in the city into an education about look how man is feeding himself today, where do these products come from, how are they processed. At the same time as trying to insulate our children from the harmful influence in the world, part of the lifestyle is to immunize our children, to give them immunity by explaining to them as they begin to grow older, more curious, and to mature, what is the world that surrounds them, what challenges are they likely to encounter. You know, the purity of the relationships between a man and a woman, which are called family purity, extends throughout the family to the modest way in which we conduct ourselves with our children. Parents do not appear unclad before their children, and we teach our children the principle of modesty, of modestly covering the body in public, and we encourage our children to experience this in a wholesome way. I mean, in our home, thank God, the relationship between the brothers and sisters is wonderful because they know the limits, and all of this has to be conveyed in so many subtle ways. It's part of the art of parenting. We have to teach our children so many skills they will need for their independence in this world. We have to not only provide them with nourishing food, but to, as they grow and mature, teach them what are the foods that are nourishing and why we don't let them party all the time off all the junk that is available in the stores. And we teach them the value of exercise. We teach them the values of integrity and purity and morality. And I think all of these are part of the Torah lifestyle on all levels, our own spiritual life with God, which we return time after time during the day, and the afternoon for the afternoon service, and the evening for the evening service. Each person in our day and age must find his or her own way to properly pray before their Creator and their Maker. And all of this, I think, is the Torah lifestyle.
Well, Reb Avraham, I've considered it a privilege to speak with you and a pleasure to speak with you. And I thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to make time for us.
The pleasure has been mine, Monty. Thank you so much. Please keep in touch, and please, everybody, feel free to visit with www.azamra.org. That's AZAMRA. I shall sing to God with my strength and might, and let's all sing the good song together and welcome Melech Mashiach in our time, which will be win-win for everybody.
I'm sure you have demands on your time, and so I won't keep you any longer. But again, thank you very, very much. I've considered
Have
this.
Have a good day, Monty. I'd be very grateful when you put up a link to this interview, if you would kindly send me the link in an email.
I certainly will.
Thank you very much, and do keep me posted. And all strength to you.
Thank
Shalom.
you. Thank you, and shalom to you too.
Shalom, Monty. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over shall men give unto your bosom. For with the same measure that you met withal, it shall be measured unto you again. Luke chapter 6, verse 38. Lamb Radio is making sure the integrity of this station meets all regulations required by law. If Lamb has been a blessing to you in any way, and you believe the Lord is leading you to help us financially meet these requirements, please donate using the financial support button on MessianicLambRadio.com. May the Lord richly bless you in all of your endeavors.
Joel chapter 2 verses 1 and then 12 to 13. Joel says, blow a trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh is coming. Surely it is near. Joel again, chapter 2. We're going to go to begin with verse 12. Yet even now declares Yahweh, return to me with all your heart. Again, repentance is a heart issue. And with fasting, weeping, and mourning, and rend your heart and not your garments. God's just not looking for an outward show of repentance. He's looking for an inward heart repentance, where our heart is rended, where we are truly sorry for our actions and for not obeying His Torah and for not obeying the words of our Messiah and the word that He's given us. And return to the Lord your God. Hebrew again, return, shuv, to return. For He is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness, and relenting of evil. Who knows whether He will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind Him, even a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God. Blow a trumpet in Zion, consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly, Gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children and the nursing infants. Let the bridegroom come out of his room and the bride out of her bridal chamber. Hallelujah.